Since I made my first video about the Kechari Mudra, by far the most common comment that I get is some sort of an objection to snipping the frenulum of the tongue. And today I want to address those objections, those comments, one by one, because I think it is a very good thing to really deeply ask ourselves if this is correct for us. You need to ask yourself, is snipping the frenulum right for you? And you need to feel into it. And today I want to give you just the information as I see it so that you can make an informed decision. Because cutting the frenulum, it's an irreversible process really. There's no realistic, easy way of getting the frenulum back. So before you take that step, you really can consider within yourself if it's worth it for you. The bottom line here really is that the Kechari Mudra is an advanced yoga practice. It is a culminating yogic practice. It is for people that really want to reach, with their own perception, states of breakthrough nirvana, states of ananda, states of pure bliss. So this isn't for casual yogis, to just try out and experiment with. It is for people with a very strong desire for liberation and moksha. Now, with that being said, let us cover, I've got a little list here, the common objections which I see to snipping the frenulum of the tongue. And the first one that I received the most is basically that a very famous yogi, he's called Lahira Mahasya. I hope I pronounced his name right because I want to be fully respectful to this great yogi. But he was said to be very against snipping the frenulum. Now, when a great yogi says something like that, we should pay careful attention. Unfortunately, Lahira is not on social media. He is long past. He actually lived before the time of penicillin. He lived a long time ago. So we can't ask him. I did a couple of hours research on the internet. Unfortunately, I cannot find the primary quote that Lahira gave, or if he wrote it down, I can't find that. So really, I am a little bit blind to the context to why Lahira said this. Did he say it for practical reasons? Like, for instance, maybe he didn't want people to get infected under the tongue? Perhaps he said it to a particular person who wasn't ready. He saw this particular person didn't have the desire, the strong bhakti for liberation, so he told that person, don't do it. So I would very politely invite, if anyone does know the primary source and the context for which Lahira made that comment that we shouldn't snip the frenulum, please share it with me in the comments. I would love to discuss it more. Perhaps we can all find clarity with Lahira's comments. But at the same time, because we have Lahira, this great yogi of a Kriya Yoga lineage, saying something important, there are other great yogic texts which strongly encourage the cutting of the frenulum. In particular, I won't go into too much detail, but quite a few of the Upanishads, which is some of the most ancient rock bottom aspects of Hinduism, very, very deep spirituality, these Upanishads strongly encourage the cutting of the frenulum. There are stories of Shiva himself, consciousness itself, calling the frenulum of death. And actually it is said, as I understand it, in Sanskrit, the word for the frenulum of the tongue is actually a bandhanam, a bondage of death. So we can say that Lahira, perhaps, I wish I knew what context he said it in, he does not approve of cutting the frenulum, but then at the same time we can balance that out by seeing that ancient yogic texts strongly encourage the cutting of the frenulum. So I hope we can resolve it a bit more in the comments why and what Lahira said, but let's also see what the Upanishads said. And now, that was my first point, probably the longest point, because this is what I receive all the time as a comment, and I think it is valid. But moving on now, There's just this second opinion that we want to, in general, respect the body. We don't want to be reckless, we don't want to go cutting it, and I entirely agree with that feeling, with that sort of philosophy about respecting the body as a temple of God. And I don't actually have any tattoos, I don't have any piercings, nothing like that. I just like to keep the body very clean. I don't even wear a necklace or a watch or rings. I like this unmodified feeling of being a human being. But the thing about cutting the frenulum is it's not just for looks or appearances or something shallow. What we are pursuing with Kechari Mudra is moksha and liberation, enlightenment, very deep stuff. So for me, it has never felt like an unsacred thing to cut the frenulum, snip it in a safe, responsible way. It hasn't felt like treating the temple of God in a disrespectful way. Actually, it has felt like using the temple of God in a very focused way to access God itself, using our body as an antenna, as a vibratory tool to access higher states of consciousness, and at a deeper level to bring the Kundalini Shakti of the body up to meet divinity. So to me, it does not feel disrespectful at all, this process of snipping the frenulum slowly. But what I will say, to be accurate and nuanced, is at one point I was cutting too much. The literature would say in the Upanishads, when they give instruction of how to snip your frenulum, it says snip it by a hair's width once a week, and then let it heal, and then you snip it again. At one point I was snipping more than that because I wanted to make fast progress, and then my body did start to give me signals that this cutting is unpleasant, and at that point I stopped completely, let my tongue heal, and after some months I came back to the process. So this objection of respecting the body, if we cut the tongue, cut the frenulum of the tongue very slowly at a hair's width, there's very little pain involved, very, very little bleeding, because it's being done in a safe and a responsible way. And we're using our body ultimately for holy divine purposes, so to me it does not feel unsacred at all. But this also brings us on to the next objection, which is quite common, which is to say that this process is dangerous, physically dangerous. And to this point, I would say that is definitely true. It's not the most dangerous thing ever. It's not as dangerous as jumping off a cliff with a wingsuit, for instance. But it is dangerous in the sense that there are risks. And to this, I would say, yes, we need to be very, very responsible. The Kechari Mudra ultimately is for adults who are responsible, and it is for yogis, for meditators who are interested in liberation and moksha. It's not for casual people to just do willy-nilly. So there are veins and arteries below the tongue, at the sublingual tissue area, and you need to be very, very careful with your very, very sharp knife or whatever you're using to cut the tongue, your very, very sharp scalpel probably, not to cut those veins and arteries, and you need to do tiny, tiny snips. Also, there is an infection risk, and we need to be careful to keep everything very sterile, apply, as I do, turmeric under the tongue. But in general, there are physical risks associated with this practice, and one does need to be very, very responsible. Now, the other objection is that you sometimes hear, not so often, but if you remove the frenulum, then you are actually at a risk of not being able to talk properly or choking on your own tongue. And the theory there is in general that we have evolved, the human being has evolved the frenulum so that we don't die in our sleep by swallowing our tongue and choking on it, or that in some way the frenulum helps us speak. Now, when it comes to this question, it's just important, or it's the most easy way to resolve that question, I would say, is to look at people who have cut their frenulum, and then we don't have to be in a hypothetical land of, will it cause us issues? We can just see. And for me personally, I've cut almost all of the frenulum off, And I have absolutely no problems speaking. I'm speaking right now. I hope I'm enunciating everything quite clearly. And I've never even for a second felt like I nearly choked on my own tongue. And I've read online, I've engaged with people who have removed the frenulum of their tongue, and absolutely no one has ever reported troubles speaking at all. They speak very well, and none of them have ever reported nearly choking on their tongue. So that's that question addressed. It's an hypothetical question we can ask ourselves. Will it cause choking? Will it create speech impediment? But practically speaking, anyone that's ever done the process of snipping has not had any issues at all, at least in the vast majority of cases. If you're snipping slowly and you notice you have trouble speaking, you can of course stop the process right there because we want to be able to talk. But I don't think this is a valid risk. It's more of a hypothetical doubt that people have come up with, but with no real basis in reality. That's how I see it anyway. Now, the last objection is people will just generally say that Kechari Mudra, or rather, people will say it is not actually necessary to snip to enter the Kechari Mudra. So why would we snip at all if we don't have to? And I would agree with that comment to some extent. It's definitely possible that if you're very arduent, is that the right word? Very persistent, very disciplined, you put in a lot of hours in stretching the tongue, then you can enter Kechari Mudra. I'm very confident most people can enter it. After a few months or a couple of years of practicing, of stretching, they can enter Kechari Mudra. But also I want to be realistic here and give people accurate information. And, generally speaking, as the linguistics go, as the semantics go, we give Kechari Mudra 4 stages. And if you're not if you're not snipping, you can enter stage 2. Perhaps you can even go to stage 3. But for me, myself, I am very, very sure, 99% sure, that it doesn't matter how much I stretched. If I didn't snip the frenulum, I would never enter the higher stages, stage 4, and the higher reaches of stage 4. I would never have reached that high without snipping. It seems to me basically impossible to reach those stages without snipping. Now, of course, I just want to be accurate and nuanced. I'm just speaking from my own biology. I can't say for everyone. Perhaps some people can just stretch their frenulum much more easier than me, but that is something to consider. If you don't want to snip, you don't have to explore Kechari perhaps in stage 2 first, and then if you feel this higher calling to stretch higher, then you can seriously contemplate the snipping process. But the bottom line there is, if you are interested in Kechari Mudra, but you have a strong aversion to snipping, you still can enter stage 2 very realistically for yourself. Reaching up into stage 4, just generally reaching higher, this is an inner calling that people get that has to be very genuine and very authentic. And this desire, this very strong bhakti, is literally to reach into divinity, reach really into states of consciousness which are, in Hinduism or in Sanskrit, they have the word ananda, just pure bliss consciousness.